So if your company deploys a faulty AI tool today, the penalty isn't just a PR nightmare anymore.
Right. It's definitely not just a slap on the wrist.
No, I mean, depending on where you operate, you could literally be looking at fines of up to 35 million euros.
Or, and this is the crazy part, 7% of your global annual revenue, whichever is higher.
Exactly. For a lot of organizations, that is an absolute existential threat. I mean, one bad algorithmic deployment could just legally wipe out the business overnight.
It's a massive, massive shift in liability. We've really transitioned out of this era where artificial intelligence was just, an engineering experiment.
Like a race to write the coolest code.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's this incredibly complex, multidisciplinary governance challenge.
Which is exactly what we're diving into today. So, welcome to the deep dive. Whether you're prepping for a major strategic meeting, or maybe you're looking to pivot your career, or you're just intensely curious about the actual business of AI, today is all about the people hired to make sure those catastrophic fines never happen.
The people who actually have to govern this stuff.
Right. We are demystifying the exploding field of AI governance, risk management, and compliance, which you'll usually hear referred to as AIGRC. We got a huge stack of sources today.
We do, yeah. Everything from regulatory frameworks like the EU AI Act to specialized career data and some really fascinating research from Gartner.
Yeah, we're basically going to break down what these roles actually are, the frameworks they use every single day, like NIST and AI TRISM, and why companies are suddenly desperate to hire people who can bridge the gap between compliance and code.
It's the ultimate shortcut to understanding where the entire tech industry is heading right now.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
And I think we have to start with the sheer regulatory pressure that basically forced these jobs into existence.
Yeah, you really can't understand the job titles without understanding the legal tsunami behind them. And the primary catalyst here is definitely the EU AI Act,
which just recently went into effect.
Right. And what's fascinating here is that it's acting as the global standard setter. Sort of like what GDPR did for data privacy, but for AI.
But they're not regulating the math. Right?
Exactly. They aren't trying to regulate the neural networks or the code itself. They are regulating the operational risk. The Act categorizes AI into 4 distinct risk levels.
Right. So that's unacceptable, high, limited, and minimal.
You got it.
And the unacceptable category is pretty straightforward. I mean, those are just outright bans on things like social scoring by governments or real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces.
Yeah, those are just a hard no.
But the real operational headache for like a standard enterprise lives in that high-risk category.
Yeah.
Because we aren't talking about sci-fi autonomous weapons here. We're talking about everyday corporate functions.
Oh, absolutely. Things like automated resume screening in HR.
Right. Or medical diagnostics, credit scoring algorithms, tools that manage critical infrastructure.
And if a company wants to deploy one of those high-risk systems, they are now subject to an intense level of ex-ante oversight.
Ex-ante meaning before the fact.
Right. Meaning the review has to happen before the AI is ever pushed into production.
Yeah.
A huge part of this is something called a fundamental rights impact assessment, or a FRIA.
Right, FRIA. Okay, so what does that actually look like for a company?
Well, they literally have to map out exactly who the system will affect, quantify any potential operational harms, and provide documented proof that they have technical mitigations ready to go.
So like a massive paper trail proving the AI is safe before it even touches a single customer.
Exactly.
But it's not just Europe, right? Because looking at the US, the federal approach has been, well, a lot lighter, mostly voluntary guidelines so far.
Yeah, at the federal level. But the individual states are aggressively stepping up to fill that void.
Right, like California's SB 53. That one really stood out in the sources because it specifically targets the developers of what they call frontier models.
And frontier models, just for context, are those highly advanced, massive-scale AI systems, the ones really pushing the boundaries of what the PEC can do.
Yeah. And SB 53 requires developers of those frontier models to publish these extensive transparency reports, like detailing exactly what the models can and cannot do.
Which is a huge undertaking on its own.
It is. But, crucially, they also have to prove they have rigorous cybersecurity practices in place, specifically to protect the model weights.
And for anyone listening who might be unfamiliar, model weights are basically the core mathematical recipe. It's the learned connections inside the neural network that actually make the AI smart.
Right, so if a bad actor steals those weights, they aren't just stealing data, they are stealing the entire value of the model.
Which suddenly turns AI governance into a hardcore cybersecurity issue, not just, a compliance checkbox for the legal team.
But wait, if the rules are shifting this fast and the technology is evolving literally by the week, how does any company actually ship a product without getting just buried in compliance paperwork? I mean, doesn't this grind innovation to a complete halt?
Well, that exact tension is what spawned this massive demand for a brand new class of professionals. Companies realized really quickly that they cannot ask their software engineers to, interpret the nuances of the EU AI Act.
Engineers want to build, they don't want to read legal statutes.
Exactly. But conversely, your traditional legal team usually doesn't understand the underlying architecture of a transformer model.
So you need a bridge.
Yes. You need a distinct layer of professionals who can translate complex legal requirements into actionable engineering guardrails.
Okay, so let's look at the specific people being hired to be that bridge. Because knowing the risks exist in theory doesn't solve anything. Someone actually has to walk into the office on Monday and, build the guardrails.
Right.
And the sources actually group these AIGRC roles into 4 main pillars. It's super helpful. Let's start with the first pillar, policy and compliance.
Okay, so professionals in these roles are essentially the interpreters. They take all these dense regulations like the EU AI Act or California's SB 53, and they develop internal policies to make sure the organization actually complies.
They sit right in the middle of everything, don't they?
Yeah, they have to coordinate constantly between the legal, product, and engineering teams. So the common titles you'll see here are things like AI Governance Specialist or AI Governance Manager.
And I also saw AI Policy Analyst, AI Policy Associate, and AI Compliance Manager.
Exactly, that's your first pillar.
Okay, so the second pillar is ethics and responsible AI. And this one is fascinating because it focuses on assessing AI systems for bias and fairness and developing ethical guidelines and conducting those impact assessments on communities that we mentioned earlier.
And there's a really interesting detail from the research here.
Oh, about the AI ethicist title.
Yes. The corporate world actually rarely uses the specific title, AI ethicist, unless the role requires a formal background in philosophy or ethical theories.
Which makes sense because companies are usually looking for operational fairness, not theoretical debates about consciousness.
Exactly. So instead of AI ethicist, you'll see titles like AI ethics specialist, AI ethics lead, or AI ethics officer.
Right. And also responsible AI manager or responsible AI program manager. Oh, and I saw AI fairness specialist and trust and safety AI manager.
Yeah, those are all squarely in that second pillar.
Okay. Moving to the third pillar, risk and security.
These are the defenders. These roles are completely dedicated to identifying vulnerabilities before they cause harm.
So they're building the risk mitigation frameworks.
Right, and they do a lot of adversarial testing. So you'll see titles like AI security specialist or AI red team lead. Red teaming is where they essentially try to hack or break their own AI to find its weak spots.
And they also handle something called the synthetic outlaw problem, right?
Oh, yes. That is such a fascinating concept.
I love that term. Basically, a synthetic outlaw is when an AI complies with all the rules on paper, but because it is so relentlessly optimizing for its goal, it still causes harm.
Right, it obeys the letter of the law but completely shatters the spirit of it.
Which requires dynamic monitoring to catch. So for these defenders, the titles to look for are AI Risk Manager or Responsible AI Risk Manager, and also Incident Response Specialist specifically focused on reporting critical AI safety incidents.
Which brings us to the fourth and final pillar, which is audit and assurance.
The evaluators.
Exactly. These are the independent evaluators. They provide independent assessments, auditing the systems for both performance and regulatory compliance.
Because you can't just grade your own homework.
Right. They are the ones documenting the hard evidence that eventually goes to regulators or the board of directors. So common titles here are AI auditor, AI safety auditor, AI assurance lead, and algorithm accountability specialist.
Algorithm accountability specialist. That is a heavy title.
It is.
And I just want to point out to you listening, if you already have a background in HR or law or traditional compliance and risk management, your domain experience is actually a superpower for these exact roles. You don't necessarily need to know how to code a neural network from scratch to be an AI governance specialist. You just need to know how to govern the corporate environment that the tech operates in.
The technical mechanics can be learned, but that institutional knowledge of how to navigate enterprise risk, that is the real foundation of these roles.
Okay, so we've looked at the specialized boots-on-the-ground roles. But as these professionals scale up, say they hit 6 to 10 plus years of experience, the titles obviously evolve, right?
Oh, yeah. Because then you are talking about enterprise-wide oversight.
So we need to zoom out to the C-suite. Who is orchestrating this entire ecosystem from the top?
That responsibility is increasingly falling to the Chief AI Officer or the CIIO, or sometimes you'll see Chief AI Ethics Officer or Chief Trust Officer.
And also titles like Director of AI Governance, Head of AI Ethics, VP of AI Risk, or Global Head of Responsible AI.
Exactly. And there's a quote from the sources that really stuck with me. It says, AI is the new electricity.
Wow, meaning it's a general-purpose technology.
Right. It's not just a software tool that one department uses. It will fundamentally rewire how marketing, HR, finance, and operations all function.
Cool.
And because it's that broad, it needs executive leadership. You can't just tuck it under the IT department anymore.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, though. If a company already has a Chief Data Officer, a CDO, who ensures data quality, and they have a Chief Information Officer, a CIO, who manages the IT infrastructure, isn't a CAIO a bit redundant? Aren't they all just stepping on each other's toes?
It sounds like they would be, but they actually oversee very distinct domains. So a chief data officer is laser focused on the data pipeline, making sure the data is clean, secure, and accessible.
Right.
And a chief information officer manages the underlying hardware, the software licenses, the network architecture. But the chief AI officer uniquely focuses on the strategic integration and governance of the intelligence running on top of all that data and infrastructure. Their mandate is to basically transform the business operations using AI while making sure the AI isn't just imposed by some central committee without managing the risks.
And one of the core tools the CAIO uses to manage those profound ethical challenges is the FATE framework, right? FATE.
Yes. Fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics. It essentially functions as an executive checklist.
Let's break that down. So fairness.
Fairness is about establishing metrics to ensure your models aren't just perpetuating historical biases that are hidden in the training data.
And accountability.
That defines exactly who takes the fall and who is responsible for the fix if an AI fails during a critical task. Say a loan approval system denies someone incorrectly. Who is accountable?
Right. I totally get fairness and accountability. But transparency seems, well, incredibly difficult to mandate, because neural networks are famous for being black boxes.
They are.
So how can an executive demand transparency for a system that even its own engineers don't fully understand?
And that right there is the defining challenge of the field. Because you're right, you can't always achieve mathematical transparency. You can't always map exactly how a billion parameters interacted to produce one specific output.
So what do?
You mandate process transparency. You rigorously document what training data was used, what demographic parity tests were run, what the known failure rates are. You create transparency around the governance itself, even if the algorithm is a bit opaque.
And then the E in FATE is ethics, which is just managing those broader moral dilemmas and the impact on the workforce.
Exactly.
This really highlights the need for rigorous toolkits. Like, you can't just walk into the engineering department and yell, "Be fair, be transparent."
No, that never works.
They need a structural mechanism.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, which our sources cleverly boil down to a really memorable acronym, GM3.
Govern, map, measure, and manage.
Okay, so NIST is technically voluntary in the U.S., right?
It is voluntary, but it's rapidly becoming the absolute gold standard for how to actually operationalize this stuff.
So let's walk through GM3 using a practical example. Let's use that AI resume screener we mentioned earlier.
Perfect. So the first step is govern. This establishes the baseline culture. Who is accountable for this HR tool, and what are our corporate policies regarding hiring algorithms?
Okay. Then we move to map.
Right. Map is where you identify the specific context and the risks. Who might be harmed? Does this specific resume screener run the risk of, say, unfairly filtering out certain demographics based on flawed historical hiring data?
You're figuring out what could go wrong before it does.
Exactly. And once you've mapped that out, you move to measure. This is where theoretical governance gets quantitative. How do we actually test for that bias we just mapped?
So maybe the team runs demographic parity tests to mathematically evaluate if the AI is selecting candidates from different groups at equal rates.
Spot on. You are measuring the system's robustness against different inputs.
And finally, manage.
Manage is the continuous oversight. Once we've measured the baseline, how do we mitigate any remaining risks? And how do we monitor this resume screener over its entire life cycle?
So when organizations are hiring for those AI risk manager roles, they are desperately looking for candidates who can execute GM3. They need people who can take a vague fear, map it, measure it, and manage it down to an acceptable level.
Absolutely.
But GM3 is mostly about risk framework. We also need to talk about how governance happens at the architectural level.
Yeah.
And the sources bring up Gartner's AI TRISM. That's trust, risk, and security management.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, there's a massive misconception right now that AI governance is just data governance with a fancy new label.
It's not.
No. It is a critical mistake to think that. Data governance is foundational, obviously, but AI TRISM requires a whole new layer of real-time oversight. Think of it like this. Traditional data governance is like inspecting the physical pipes in a house to make sure they don't leak and checking that the water going into them is clean.
Okay, I like this analogy.
But AI governance is like monitoring that water while it is flowing through the pipes.
Yeah.
Because halfway through the system, the AI might hallucinate, and that water spontaneously turns into a combustible gas.
Oh, wow. Because AI models have emergent behaviors. They adapt and generate novel outputs that no one explicitly programmed.
Exactly. You can't just secure the pipe. You have to secure the unpredictable logic happening inside the pipe in real time.
So AI TRISM demands this runtime inspection. It requires constant visibility.
Yes. Companies need a dynamic catalog of every AI system they use, complete with a bill of materials and model cards that explain the training and limitations.
And TRISM also emphasizes independence from any single AI hosting provider, right? To avoid vendor lock-in.
That is so important. The market is moving incredibly fast. You might build your tools on a foundational model from Company A today, but Company B might drop a vastly superior, safer model next month.
And if your governance framework is completely hard-coded to Company A's ecosystem,
you're trapped. You have to be able to govern the AI outputs regardless of which foundational model is powering it underneath.
Okay, so we've covered the regulations, the 4 pillars of GRC roles, the CAIO, and the actual toolkits like GM3 and TRISM. Let's talk about breaking into this field, because the talent gap is huge and the salaries are wild.
The demand is definitely outpacing the supply right now.
The sources outline 2 main paths into this. There's the non-technical path. This is for your risk managers, lawyers, and HR professionals. Their goal is basically building AI literacy, learning the mechanics so they can apply their existing governance chops.
Right.
And then there's a technical path. This is for the software engineers and data scientists who are stepping back to learn the regulatory frameworks and the compliance layer.
And while both paths are totally viable, the absolute highest demand and the highest compensation goes to what the industry is calling Type 2 professionals.
The unicorns.
Pretty much. These are people who understand the complex nuances of the EU AI Act, but they also deeply understand machine learning algorithms. They can bridge that gap perfectly. They can sit with the lawyers to draft a policy and then walk down the hall and help the engineers adjust a model's weights.
That dual capability is so rare, and the paycheck reflects it. Entry-level roles in AIGRC are starting between $90K and $130K.
Which is a very strong starting salary.
Yeah. And then mid-level roles, which might just require a few years of general compliance or technical experience, jump to $130K to $180K. Senior directors are looking at $180K to $250K. And the C-suite, the chief AI officers, are making well beyond that.
And honestly, those numbers are just going to keep climbing because the risk is about to escalate again.
Because of agentic AI.
Yes. Right now, we are governing mostly static models. You ask a chatbot a question, it answers, the interaction is over. But agentic AI takes independent action.
Right. It doesn't just draft an email and wait for you to hit send. It reads your inbox, figures out a strategy, drafts the replies, and hits send all on its own.
And governing a system with agency requires a fundamentally different posture. Governance professionals are going to have to enforce strict least agency protocols.
Meaning the AI is only given the absolute bare minimum permissions to do its job.
Exactly. And they'll have to adopt zero trust environments where every single microaction the AI takes is independently authenticated before it executes.
So what does this all mean? We've gone from the regulatory hammer of the EU AI Act through the 4 pillars of specialized roles up to the C-suite and through the toolkits. It means AI is maturing. It's moving from a wild experiment to a governed enterprise-grade utility. But it desperately needs guided human oversight.
It does. But it leaves us with a really fascinating thought to end on. As these models become more and more autonomous, like the agentic AI we just talked about, they're going to be making thousands of independent micro-decisions a second.
Which a human risk manager cannot possibly review manually.
Exactly. Human oversight will become the bottleneck. So how long will it be before companies have to start deploying AI systems specifically designed to audit and govern their other AI systems?
Oh, wow. AI governing AI.
Right. And when that happens, the ultimate question becomes, who is ultimately governing the automated governor?
That is a wild thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep examining the frameworks, keep asking the hard questions, and we'll see you next time.